The forest was silent, save for the crunch of snow beneath Ilara's boots. The world was painted white, every branch, every stone, every patch of ground hidden beneath the frozen blanket of winter. Snowflakes fell lazily from the gray sky, their delicate shapes vanishing as soon as they touched her cloak. She pulled it tighter around her shoulders, shivering against the bitter cold, but she pressed on. Medicine lay in her satchel, carefully wrapped to protect it, and the villagers in the distant settlement relied on her. She could not fail them, not today. Ilara's breath rose in soft clouds, visible against the pale light. The forest seemed endless, an ocean of white and gray. Yet she knew the path well enough, or at least she thought she did. Every so often, a tree with familiar markings or a jagged rock she had passed on her last journey reminded her she was on the right track. And yet, as she moved deeper into the trees, an unease settled over her. The air seemed colder here, heavier. Even the birds were silent, their absence echoing in the spaces between the trees. She stopped, gripping her satchel tighter, listening. A twig snapped behind her. Her heart leapt. She turned, scanning the dim light between the trunks. Nothing. A shadow moved, barely noticeable, and she shook her head. "Just my imagination," she whispered to herself. She forced a nervous laugh and began walking again, faster this time, the snow crunching under her boots. But the forest had other plans. From the shadows, figures emerged, rough, masked men with eyes sharp and cold as ice. They moved like wolves, surrounding her before she had a chance to react. She stumbled backward, her satchel hitting the ground, spilling its precious contents. Her hands flew to gather the vials and cloths, but the men were upon her. One grabbed her arm, yanking her toward the deeper woods. "Stop, please!" she cried, struggling. "I have nothing of value to you!" The bandits only laughed, their voices harsh, cutting through the quiet of the forest. Their eyes were hard, their grip unyielding. One of them, taller than the rest, leaned close. "Medicine girl," he said, voice low and threatening. "We know its worth. Keep quiet, and it will be worth your life." Ilara's stomach knotted. She had faced patients with serious injuries, sickness that took lives without warning, yet the fear in her chest now was unlike anything she had felt before. She was not trained for this, not prepared. Her mind raced. She could not fight all of them. She could not outrun them either. The bandits dragged her through the snow, deeper into the mountains, where the trees grew sparse and the wind cut through layers of clothing like knives. Her fingers were numb, her face stung from the cold. Each step was agony, her boots filled with snow, each movement exhausting her. And still, she forced herself to walk. She forced herself to breathe. She forced herself not to scream. Hours passed, or it felt like hours. The sun sank lower, casting long, eerie shadows across the snow. The wind howled like a restless spirit, bending the trees and swirling snow into sharp-edged drifts. Ilara stumbled, nearly falling, but one of the bandits yanked her up before she could hit the ground. She tasted blood from a split lip, and the bitter tang reminded her of how fragile her body was in this wilderness. Night came quickly. The darkness seemed almost alive, pressing in on every side. The bandits built a small fire, its weak light flickering across their grim faces. Ilara crouched near the snow, her knees pulled to her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, seeking warmth that would not come. She did not cry. She refused, but tears pricked at her eyes nonetheless. She thought of home, of the small room she had left behind, of the letters she had written but never sent. She thought of the villagers who depended on her, the sick children, the weary mothers, the old men waiting for the medicine she carried. She thought of all the times she had healed others with steady hands and calm words, and yet here she was, helpless, unable to heal herself. Her mind wandered, and memories of her life came unbidden. She remembered the first time she had taken an oath as a nurse, promising to protect life, no matter what. She remembered her mentor's soft voice. Courage is not the absence of fear, Elara, but the choice to act despite it. She whispered the words now into the freezing wind, clinging to them as a lifeline. Hours blurred, and Elara's body shook from cold and exhaustion. The bandits, careless and cruel, left her alone for a moment as they argued over something lost in the snow. She took the chance, huddling against a tree, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts, the cold biting into her lungs. She did not know how long she had been alone when she heard it. A soft crunch in the snow, different from the bandits' heavy steps. She froze, her heart thundering. The shadow approached, tall and broad, moving with ease through the storm. She could not see his face, but there was something in his presence, something commanding and yet strangely protective. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. The figure did not answer immediately. He knelt beside her, and though she could not see him clearly, she felt the warmth of his presence, a strange contrast to the icy wind. He moved with care, wrapping a thick cloak around her shoulders. "You're not safe here," he said finally, his voice deep and calm, carrying authority without harshness. Elara's mind raced. She did not know if she could trust him, yet instinct told her that to refuse help now would mean death. She allowed him to lift her, supporting her weight with ease. His hands were strong yet gentle, a paradox that unsettled her. The storm raged around them, snow stinging her face, yet the stranger carried her through it as if the blizzard dared not touch him. They moved in silence, the only sound her shivering breaths and the crunch of snow under his boots. At last, he stopped at a small hollow, a natural shelter partially covered by rocks and snow. He set her down carefully, helping her sit against a protective wall of stone. His eyes, sharp and piercing, studied her face, searching for signs of injury. "You're lucky I found you," he said softly, almost to himself. "The mountains, they do not forgive easily." Elara's teeth chattered, her voice barely audible. "Who are you?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Call me Kyle," he said. "You need rest. The storm will not pass soon, and it is not safe to move." For the first time since her capture, Elara allowed herself to relax, leaning into the warmth of the stranger's presence. Her mind, exhausted and frayed, could not process everything, the bandits, the snow, the fear. But she clung to a fragile thread of hope. Perhaps she had not been left entirely alone, and as the wind screamed outside, howling across the empty hills, she closed her eyes. She did not sleep, not fully. She could feel the presence of the mountains, the weight of the snow, and the stranger beside her. Something in the air felt ancient, as if the forest itself held its breath. And then she heard it. A low sound carried by the wind, faint but undeniable. Footsteps, moving through the snow, coming closer. Elara's heart raced. She opened her eyes and looked at Kyle. His expression had hardened, his body tense, ready for whatever approached. "Bandits?" she whispered. He shook his head, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Not yet. But danger comes with the night." She shivered, not just from cold, but from the realization that her journey had only just begun. The mountains were vast, wild and unforgiving, and in their white embrace, she understood that survival would demand everything she had: courage, wit, and perhaps trust in the stranger who had appeared like a shadow from the snow. The storm raged on, and in the hollow, two figures, one shaken, one stoic, prepared for the long night ahead. Outside, the snow fell endlessly, covering the world in silence, mystery, and the promise of a fate neither could yet foresee. The storm raged outside, snow whipping against the hollow rocks like frozen arrows. Inside, Kyle tended a small fire he had managed to light, its flickering warmth pushing back the cold that seeped into every corner. Elara sat close, wrapped in the thick cloak he had draped over her shoulders, watching the flames dance. Her hands, stiff and red from the cold, hovered near the warmth, almost trembling. Kyle worked in silence, gathering sticks and kindling, his movements deliberate, precise, as if every motion had been practiced for years. He did not speak, yet Elara could feel his presence like a shield against the darkness outside. The storm was harsh, the mountains merciless, but for the first time since her capture, she felt safe. She studied him in the firelight, broad-shouldered, with hair dark as midnight and eyes that seemed to hold secrets deeper than the mountains themselves. There was a weight to him, a loneliness that wrapped around him like the cloak she now wore. She wondered what kind of life a man could have in a place so remote, surrounded by endless snow and the silence of the peaks. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet. Why help me? You don't even know me." Cale's gaze lingered on the fire for a moment before he answered. "Because you needed it. The mountains are cruel, and not all who wander them are so fortunate." His voice was calm, almost rough, carrying the strength of someone used to surviving in a world that demanded it. Elara shivered and hugged the cloak tighter around her. "I should have been more careful. I didn't expect bandits." She forced a smile, though it was weak. "I thought I knew this path well." Cale finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "The mountains are full of surprises, some cruel, some necessary." She felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the weight of his words. There was something in him, a shadow of pain, perhaps even guilt. Yet he did not speak of it, keeping his secrets close like the mountains themselves. They sat in silence for a while, the storm outside masking the sound of their breathing. Elara's thoughts drifted to the villagers she had left behind, the sick child who waited for her medicine, the elderly man who trusted her care, the mother who had smiled at her as she promised to return safely. She had always been a healer, a protector, someone who offered hope when it was needed most. And yet, here she was, her own life hanging by a fragile thread in the hands of a man she barely knew. Cale stirred the fire, adding more wood. Sparks flew upward, catching the edges of the hollow and casting shadows that flickered across the walls. "You have courage," he said suddenly, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Most would have given up long before now." Elara met his gaze, surprised. "Courage? I'm scared out of my mind." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said softly. "It's the choice to act despite it." Her breath caught. Those words, they sounded familiar, yet different. They were the words she had whispered to herself hours ago in the storm, and now, hearing them from him, they felt like a lifeline. As the evening wore on, Cale motioned for her to rest against a pile of furs he had gathered. The warmth of the fire and the thick blankets gradually seeped into her bones, easing the stiffness and numbness. She closed her eyes, letting the fire's heat soothe her, and allowed herself to lean against him just slightly, testing the boundary he did not push. "Thank you," she murmured, almost inaudibly. Cale did not answer, only nodded slightly, his gaze distant. She could sense the distance between them, a barrier built from years of solitude, pain, and perhaps loss. But for now, that distance felt less frightening than the storm outside. As the night deepened, the wind outside grew wilder, snow lashing against the hollow, forcing them to huddle closer to the fire. The howling seemed endless, yet within the hollow there was a strange stillness, a fragile, tenuous sanctuary. Hours passed, The storm showed no sign of easing, and the night grew darker, thicker, as if the mountains themselves were closing in. Ilara stirred, waking from a fitful sleep, and realized Cale had moved closer to check on her. His expression softened, but there was a tension in his posture, a readiness for danger that never seemed to leave him. "You're awake," he said quietly, as though speaking too loudly might awaken the mountain itself. She nodded, shivering. "I'm cold." He handed her a cup of warm tea he had prepared in silence. The liquid soothed her throat and warmed her hands, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel safe. She sipped slowly, studying him. "Cale, do you live here alone?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I've lived here for a long time. The mountains, they are easier than people." She frowned, sensing both sorrow and strength in his words. "Why? What happened?" He did not answer immediately, and she realized some questions were too heavy to ask, even in moments of vulnerability. Instead, he looked out the narrow opening of the hollow, his sharp eyes scanning the white expanse. She followed his gaze but saw only snow and shadows. And yet she felt his vigilance, the careful attention of someone who had survived the harshest of winters and the cruelties of the world beyond. The silence stretched, comfortable and tense at the same time. In it, Ilara felt a connection growing, an unspoken understanding. Both of them were marked by loss, by solitude, and by survival. And though neither admitted it, both were aware of the fragile trust forming between them. Suddenly a sound broke the quiet, a distant crunch in the snow, faint but unmistakable. Kyle's eyes narrowed and his body stiffened. "Bandits?" Ilara whispered, fear returning in a rush. Kyle shook his head slowly, listening. "Not yet. But someone comes." His voice carried the weight of experience, a warning more powerful than any words. He rose, moving to the edge of the hollow, eyes scanning the white horizon. Ilara watched him, heart pounding. There was a strength in him, an unyielding force that seemed to make the mountains themselves obey. She wanted to ask more questions. About him, about why he lived here, about what he had lost. But the storm outside reminded her that words could wait. Survival came first. Cale returned to the fire and gestured for her to stay seated. "Stay here. Whatever comes, you must not run. Trust the fire, trust the walls, and trust me." Ilara nodded, though fear still gripped her. She had always relied on her own strength, her own skill, yet now she felt something new, an unfamiliar sense of surrender. Not weakness, she reminded herself, but a choice. To trust. To believe that she could survive, not alone, but with someone who understood the mountains in ways she never could. The hours passed, each moment stretching long in the silence of the storm. Ilara felt fatigue pressing on her eyelids, yet she could not sleep fully. Every sound, every shift in the wind set her nerves on edge. And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the cold, there was a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. A warmth born from the presence of someone who had saved her life, someone who might, perhaps, see her as more than a victim of circumstance. As dawn began to break, pale light filtering through the hollow, Ilara noticed movement outside the snow. Figures, shapes, at first indistinct, were coming closer. Her heart leapt, and she turned to Kyle. "They're coming," she said, voice trembling. Kyle's jaw tightened. "Yes, and this time we cannot rely only on fire and walls. We must be ready." Ilara's stomach twisted. The bandits were back, or something worse. And yet, for the first time, she did not feel helpless. Beside her was someone who could fight, someone who had survived the mountain's cruelty, and though she would not admit it yet, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. The hollow seemed smaller now, the storm outside more urgent, and the unknown more pressing than ever. And as Kyle moved to prepare for what was coming, Ilara realized the journey she had begun alone was far from over, and the mountains still held secrets neither of them could yet foresee. The ridge above the hollow was alive with movement. Shadows shifted across the snow, human shapes, deliberate and silent. Ilara's heart pounded as she watched Kale rise, the firelight flickering across his strong features. He moved with ease, like the mountains themselves obeyed him, every step measured, careful, practiced. "You must stay close," he instructed, his voice low and steady. "Whatever comes, do not move from the hollow. Trust the walls, trust the snow, and trust me." Ilara nodded, though fear and adrenaline twisted together inside her. She clutched the thick cloak tighter, feeling its warmth against her skin, and wondered how a man could survive alone in these mountains, relying only on himself and the land. She had never met anyone like Kyle, strong, silent, mysterious. And yet there was something more, something gentle buried beneath his rugged exterior. The figures paused at the edge of the ridge, scanning the hollow below. Kale crouched, his eyes sharp, reading the shapes, the wind, the snow. He muttered something under his breath, a word she could not hear, and then moved to the edges, gathering rocks and sticks, preparing traps in the snow. Ilara watched him, a mixture of awe and fear tightening in her chest. She had always been brave in her work, nursing, healing, but this was a different kind of courage. This was survival, raw and immediate, against human malice and nature's cruelty combined. Suddenly, the shadows moved forward. The bandits had found them. Kale's jaw tightened, and his eyes flickered with a memory she could not yet place, a shadow from the past, a pain buried deep. "Stay back!" he shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. The bandits froze, surprised by his sudden command. He moved quickly, throwing a line of snow and rocks, forcing the attackers to pause. The wind picked up, the storm swirling, making it difficult to see, difficult to advance. Ilara's hands shook. "Kale, what are you doing?" "Protecting you," he replied without turning. His voice was calm but firm, and she felt a strange certainty in it. She realized then that he had faced danger before, that he knew these mountains in ways she could not imagine. And for the first time, she understood why he had survived alone for so long. The bandits moved again, more carefully this time. Kyle led them toward natural traps, narrow passages in the snow where the mountains themselves would hinder their steps. He moved like a shadow, silent and precise, while Ilara followed, her eyes wide, heart racing. She wanted to help, to be brave, but she realized that even her courage had limits. As the battle continued, Kale's past began to surface in small glimpses. He moved with a fluidity born of years of hardship, yet every movement carried weight, as if he were haunted by memories of loss. Ilara noticed the tension in his shoulders, the brief flicker of pain in his eyes whenever a shadow passed too close. She wanted to ask him about it, to understand, but words were impossible amidst the snow and the danger. Finally, the last of the bandits fell back, their resolve broken by the traps, the snow, and Kale's skill. The hollow fell silent again, save for the wind and the distant howl of the mountains. Ilara sank to her knees, exhausted, her body shaking from cold and adrenaline. Kale approached her, placing a strong hand on her shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice softer now, less commanding, more concerned. I'm fine," she whispered, though her lips were chapped and her fingers numb. She looked up at him, and for a moment she saw the man behind the mystery, the one who had saved her life and fought through the storm for her. "Thank you for everything." He nodded, his eyes meeting hers for the first time without distance, without shadows. "You were brave," he said quietly. more than you know." Ilara felt her heart tighten. Brave? She had been terrified, nearly frozen in the snow. And yet, hearing him say it, she felt a spark of pride, a seed of confidence she had never realized she needed. She had survived the storm, the bandits, the mountains, and perhaps she was stronger than she had believed. As they returned to the hollow, Cale noticed something in the snow, a small object, glinting faintly under the weak light. He picked it up carefully, brushing off the snow. It was a pendant, old and worn, yet glowing faintly, as if alive. "Ilara, do you know what this is?" he asked, holding it out. She shook her head. "I've never seen it before." Cale's eyes darkened. "It belonged to my family," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Long ago it was lost in a storm, much like this. And now—" His voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ilara reached out to touch it, and a strange warmth ran through her fingers. The glow pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. She looked up at Kyle, whose face was shadowed but intense. "Cale, what is it?" He hesitated, then whispered, "It is tied to a curse. My family, my past, everything I have lost. This pendant carries a power that is dangerous, ancient, and unforgiving. If it falls into the wrong hands—" His voice broke slightly, and he shook his head, hiding the full weight of his fear. Ilara's breath caught. The danger had not ended. The bandits had been only the beginning. Now, there was something far older, far more powerful, and Cale's eyes told her that he had been fighting it alone for years. I want to help," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Whatever this is, we face it together." Cale looked at her, and for the first time, he let a small, almost imperceptible smile touch his lips. "You are not like anyone I have met," he said. "Most would have fled or cowered. But you face fear head-on. That is rare." Ilara felt a strange warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride, trust, and something else she could not name. There was a connection forming between them. Fragile, but undeniable, born from danger, survival, and shared courage. Night fell again, heavier now, the storm retreating only to leave a cold, quiet world blanketed in snow. Kyle led her inside a small hidden cave nearby, one he had used as shelter for years. He moved with ease, lighting another fire, setting furs and blankets for her to rest. "You must rest," he said. "Tomorrow we begin understanding this curse. But tonight you need warmth and sleep." Ilara nodded, exhausted, and allowed herself to sink onto the furs. She watched Cale for a moment, noting the strength in his hands, the care in his movements, the quiet weight of a man shaped by loss and solitude. She realized that beneath his rugged exterior, there was kindness, depth, and a sense of honor that few could match. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought of the pendant glowing softly in Cale's hand. A sense of unease mingled with fascination. What had caused the curse? What power did it hold? And what role did she, a simple nurse, have to play in a story that was older and darker than she could imagine? Cale sat by the fire watching her sleep, his face unreadable in the flickering light. Memories of his past haunted him, the loss of family, the betrayal of those he trusted, the endless winters spent alone, and yet, for the first time in years, there was a flicker of hope. Perhaps this woman, brave and kind, could help him find redemption. Perhaps together they could face the shadows that haunted both their pasts. Outside, the mountains were silent, but the snow whispered secrets of old. The pendant pulsed softly, and the wind seemed to carry voices, warnings, guidance, and promise. Ilara's journey was far from over, and Cale's past was not yet fully revealed. But for now, they were together, and that small truth, fragile and precious, was enough to light the darkness. The mountains lay quiet beneath a soft blanket of dawn, snow glinting like scattered crystals in the pale light. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world both still and alive, each ridge and hollow sharp and beautiful in its frozen clarity. Ilara stood beside Kale outside the small cave, the pendant clutched in her hands, its glow soft but insistent, almost like a heartbeat. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why does this pendant matter so much? What does it want from us?" Kale's dark eyes studied her, shadowed and deep. "It carries my family's past, the pain we endured, and a curse that has lingered for generations. My parents, they were protectors of the mountain, keepers of an old power, but greed and betrayal shattered everything. This pendant is all that remains, and it calls for what was lost." Ilara looked down at the pendant, feeling its warmth against her fingers. It pulsed faintly, as if sensing her touch. A strange mixture of fear and awe filled her chest. She had survived bandits, the storm, and the mountains, but now she realized that the true challenge had only begun. Kale's hand rested on her shoulder, steady and warm. "We cannot face this alone," he said. "It demands courage, trust, and something stronger, something I have not allowed myself to feel in years." Ilara met his gaze. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't know what it is, but we will face it, whatever comes." He nodded slowly, a hint of relief passing over his face. There was a vulnerability there he rarely showed, a softening of the shadow that had haunted him for years. Ilara felt a surge of something she had never expected. Hope, mingled with admiration, and something else she could not name. The mountains were silent, save for the whisper of the wind across the snow. Kale guided her toward a narrow path that led higher, toward a frozen waterfall hidden in a cliffside hollow. The air grew colder with every step, biting at their faces and hands, but neither faltered. The pendant seemed to pulse brighter as they approached the waterfall, as if urging them onward. "Why here?" Ilara asked. "Why this place?" Kyle's voice was low, almost reverent. "This waterfall is where the power rests, where my family once performed the rites to protect the mountains and their people. The curse began here, and only here can it end." Ilara shivered. The waterfall, frozen in ice, glittered like silver in the morning light. Icicles hung like crystal daggers, and the snow around the edges sparkled with an otherworldly glow. It was beautiful and terrifying. Kyle placed the pendant carefully on the ice. It pulsed brighter, its light reflecting across the frozen surface. Shadows shifted and the wind grew colder, carrying voices that seemed older than the mountains themselves. Ilara stepped closer, sensing a strange energy. "What do we do?" she asked. Kyle looked at her, eyes intense. "We must face it together. The curse is not just mine. It tests the heart. It requires trust, courage, and love." Ilara's heart skipped. Love? She had never expected this. She looked at Kale, whose usual stoic mask had softened, revealing a man both strong and vulnerable. She realized in that moment that their bond, built through danger, trust, and shared struggle, was what the curse sought to measure. The pendant pulsed again, and a wind rose from the frozen falls, encircling them. Snow swirled, shimmering like silver dust. Shadows began to emerge, faint, ethereal shapes resembling figures of the past. Kale's family, protectors and guides, their faces solemn and expectant. Ilara took a deep breath, stepping closer to Kale. "Kale, we can do this. Together." He nodded, placing a hand over hers. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a small gesture, yet it carried the weight of unspoken trust. "Together," he repeated. The pendant flared with light. and the wind seemed to carry their heartbeat, mingling it with the echoes of the past. The shadows around them shimmered and moved, forming a circle, ancient and protective. The curse sensed the unity between them, the courage, the trust, the bond forged through hardship. "Close your eyes," Kyle instructed. "Focus on what matters, the mountains, the people, the lives we've touched, and each other." Ilara obeyed, letting the cold and the wind fade from her mind. She felt Kale's hand warm hers, steady and grounding. Memories of the storm, the bandits, the endless snow, they were all behind her now. In that moment, only trust remained. Only courage. Only the bond between two souls tested by fate and hardship. The pendant glowed brighter, and a sound like a gentle chime filled the air. Light and warmth radiated outward, melting the edges of the ice around it. The shadows of Kale's ancestors seemed to nod, approving, before fading back into the snow and wind. Ilara opened her eyes to see Kale smiling, a rare, genuine expression that softened the rugged lines of his face. "It is done," he whispered. "The curse. It is broken." Ilara stared at the pendant, still warm and pulsing faintly. Relief and wonder filled her chest. We did it?" she asked, voice trembling. Kyle nodded, releasing a breath he had not realized he had been holding. "Yes. Together." A silence followed, profound and beautiful. The mountains, once harsh and indifferent, seemed to lean closer, as if acknowledging their victory. The snow sparkled brighter, the air felt lighter, and for the first time in years, Kale allowed himself to smile fully. Ilara stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his chest. "Kale, He turned to her, eyes soft, filled with emotion he had long buried. "I know," he said quietly. "And I feel it too. This connection. It has grown in the storm, in the struggle, in the mountains. And now—" The wind carried a quiet stillness, wrapping them in the frozen world like a protective cloak. They stood together, hands entwined, hearts beating in quiet harmony. The trials of the mountains, the storm and the curse had forged more than survival. They had forged a bond, deep and unbreakable. Ilara leaned her head against Kale's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body through layers of clothing. "I never thought I would survive this, and now I realize it's not just survival. It's life. Life worth living." Kyle rested his forehead against hers. "And I never thought I would open my heart again. The mountains, the curse, they took much from me. But you brought something back. Hope, trust, love." Snowflakes drifted lazily around them, light and soft. The frozen waterfall gleamed like silver behind them, a monument to endurance, courage, and redemption. They stood there, quiet, yet full of life, knowing that the mountains had tested them, and they had emerged stronger, together. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the snow. The pendant, now calm and faintly glowing, was safely tucked away, a reminder of the past, a promise of protection, and a symbol of what they had endured. Kyle and Ilara began their descent, hand in hand, their steps light, careful, yet full of purpose. The mountains, once threatening, now seemed to welcome them. Every ridge, every hollow, every tree whispered of survival, courage, and the bond forged between two souls. As they reached the hollow where their journey had first begun, Ilara looked up at Kale, her eyes bright with emotion. "Do you think we will face more challenges?" Kale smiled, brushing snow from his coat. "The mountains always have challenges, life always does, but we face them together. That is what matters." Ilara nodded, her heart full. She realized that the trials of the storm, the bandits, and the curse had been only the beginning of a story much larger than herself. And yet, with Cale by her side, she felt ready for whatever the mountains or life might bring. They paused at the edge of the forest, the sun reflecting on the snow in dazzling brilliance. Kyle turned to her, expression tender yet strong.
Ilara, you've changed me more than I thought possible.
Ilara smiled, warmth spreading through her chest.
And you've changed me, Cale. The mountains, the storm, and you. I am not the same woman who walked into them.
The wind whispered through the trees, carrying their laughter, their quiet words, and the promise of new beginnings. The mountains, vast and eternal, seemed to approve, their peaks gleaming in the morning light. And as they began to walk together side by side, Ilara realized that her journey through fear and snow had led her to something greater: love, trust, and a life renewed. The pendant rested safely against Cale's chest, its faint glow a silent guardian of their bond. And in the mountains, where the wind and snow told stories older than memory, a legend was born, not of storms or curses, but of courage, love, and redemption.